It starts like any other day, until it doesn't. A black woman, her silver hair gleaming with wisdom earned from decades of service, walks into a courthouse. They think she's nobody, but she's the one person with the power to destroy them legally. It was just after 8 a.m. when Judge Eleanora Washington stepped out of her modest sedan and approached the Charleston Federal Courthouse. The morning sun caught the silver strand of her hair as she adjusted her simple navy blazer, well-worn but meticulously pressed. At 70, her back slightly stooped from years of military service, she moved with deliberate purpose, each step measured but unwavering. She carried nothing flashy, just a weathered leather portfolio clutched in hands marked by age spots and decades of service. Around her neck hung a barely visible chain disappearing beneath her collar, carrying military dog tags she never removed. Eleanora didn't wear her judicial robe outside the courtroom. She never did. After 30 years in the Army, rising to colonel before retiring, she preferred to enter buildings quietly, observing everything like she'd been trained to do. The habit had saved her life in Vietnam and later served her well when studying law in her 50s, a career change many called impossible. But today, she wasn't greeted as a judge. She wasn't even seen as a decorated veteran who had broken barriers by becoming a federal judge at 65. She was just another elderly black woman walking into a place where power had never come easily to people who looked like her. At the security checkpoint, Deputy Hank Riker, a court bailiff known for his rigid attitude, narrowed his eyes as she approached the metal detectors. He didn't recognize her, and more importantly, he didn't care to. Something about her bothered him. She looked calm, dignified, like she belonged there. "Ma'am," Riker said, voice gruff, stepping forward with thick forearms crossed. "Need you to step out of line." Eleanora paused, her expression revealing nothing of the countless confrontations she'd weathered over her lifetime. "Is there a problem, officer?" Riker's eyes swept over her, from her neatly twisted silver locks to her sensible shoes, to the calm but confident look in her eye. He didn't answer immediately. In his world, people like her, old, black, seemingly frail, needed reminding who was really in charge. No ID displayed. "Can't just shuffle into a federal building looking like that," he muttered. Eleanora calmly reached into her blazer and produced her federal credentials. The badge gleamed under the light, but Riker barely looked at it before slipping it into his pocket. "I'd like that returned," she said, her voice soft but firm, the same tone she'd used commanding troops decades ago. He stepped closer. "You in a rush to get somewhere, Grandma?" The word hit like a slap. A younger female guard shifted nervously by the scanner, recognizing the tension but saying nothing. "I need to get to a courtroom," Eleanora said firmly, standing as straight as her age back would allow. "Then you'll follow my procedure," Riker snapped. "That includes random checks. Let's go." With one heavy hand on her upper arm, he steered her toward a windowless screening room. Inside, a steel chair sat in the center with scanning equipment and electric clippers on a nearby table. "I don't consent to this," she said clearly. "You have no legal cause to detain me. You're acting suspicious." "That's cause enough," he replied, motioning to the chair. "Sit down." When she didn't move, two officers entered. One grabbed her wrist while another held the chair. "This is a violation." "I want your names," Eleanora said, her voice rising slightly. Instead, Riker grabbed the clippers. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Standard protocol. Could be hiding something in that silver mop," he said, gesturing to her locks. Hair she'd grown for years after retirement, a symbol of her transition from military precision to civilian life. The clippers buzzed to life. Before she could react, she felt cold metal against her scalp. Silver coils fell to the floor one after another. She didn't scream or cry. 30 years in the military had taught her to endure worse. She sat there, watching her dignity being stripped strand by strand, her face betraying nothing. "Should have shown some respect," Riker said, wiping loose hairs from his sleeve. Eleanora's voice, when it returned, was steady. "You'll regret this." He leaned down, sneering. "People like you always say that." He opened the door. "You're free to go. Courtroom's that way." She rose slowly, took her badge back without asking, and walked out. Her steps were even, her expression unreadable. But in her chest burned something hotter than rage, deeper than humiliation. It was purpose, the same purpose that had driven her through combat zones, through law school at 53, through every barrier society had placed before her. The silence in the hall felt suffocating as she passed two clerks who quickly looked away. They had heard, perhaps even seen, but not one had spoken up. Down the corridor, voices filtered from the courtroom double doors. It was a high-profile morning, a police misconduct hearing involving several officers from a protest incident last year. She was supposed to enter from private chambers, her robe waiting inside, staff prepared. But today, that plan didn't matter. She stopped outside the courtroom, took a deep breath that she'd learned in military meditation training, then pushed both doors open wide. The courtroom stilled instantly. Conversations cut off mid-sentence as heads turned. Her shoes clicked loudly against the marble floor as she walked past rows of lawyers, journalists, plaintiffs, and defendants. Some stared in confusion, others in disbelief as she approached the judge's bench. Then it hit them. The elderly black woman they had watched be escorted to the hall, like a suspect, the woman whose scalp bore the evidence of brutality, was not a victim of circumstance. She was the judge. Eleanora stepped behind the bench and turned to face the courtroom. Her face was calm, the kind of calm that comes not from peace, but from surviving decades of battles, both on and off the battlefield. The bailiff, the same man who had held the clippers, stood posted by the side door. When she made eye contact with him, he went absolutely still. She didn't flinch. Eleanora reached for the robe folded over a chair and slipped it on herself, one deliberate movement at a time. It rested on her shoulders like the familiar way of her old uniform, a different kind of armor for a different kind of battle. "Is the docket ready?" she asked the court clerk, her voice steady. "Yes, Your Honor," the clerk replied, voice cracking slightly. Eleanora nodded once, then lowered herself into her chair. "We will begin today with preliminary testimony on Case 2371F, United States versus Charleston Police Department," she said as if nothing had happened. "Charges of abuse of power, excessive force, and civil rights violations." The attorneys shifted in their seats. Some wide-eyed, others guilty, and some looked angry that a black woman, elderly and assaulted, had dared return to take her rightful place. She ignored them all. The first witness was called, an officer who had pushed an elderly veteran to the ground during a peaceful demonstration, breaking two of his ribs. Eleanora listened carefully, took notes, asked no questions. Not yet. From the corner of her eye, she saw Riker slowly backing toward the rear of the courtroom, his hands twitching nervously. He looked like he wanted to disappear, like he knew his moment was coming. He was right. After the second witness, she called a recess. The courtroom emptied in silence. When only her clerk, two officers, and Riker remained, she finally looked directly at him. "Deputy Riker," she said, voice sharp as glass. He stopped mid-step. "Yes, Your Honor." "Step forward." He obeyed, moving like a man walking toward a cliff's edge. "State your full name for the record." "Hank Riker." "And how long have you served as bailiff at this courthouse?" 14 years, Your Honor." "In those 14 years, how many women have you assaulted in that screening room?" she asked, tapping her pen against her legal pad. The color drained from his face. "Your Honor, I didn't know who." "That's not what I asked." He looked around for help. None came. "How many complaints have been filed against you?" "Deputy Riker?" "I'm not sure, I don't." 12. Eleanora interrupted, her voice rising in precision, not volume. 12 formal complaints. All buried, all dismissed, because you were behind procedure and protocol. His mouth trembled. "I didn't know who you were." "And that's the problem, isn't it?" she replied, her voice cracking the stillness. "You thought I was no one. Just another elderly black woman you could bully, humiliate, shave for sport." The room fell silent. "Because of you, this courthouse has been stained. Because of your actions, the sanctity of this court is now under question. And because you assaulted a federal judge who served this country in combat before you were even born, you are now the subject of a criminal investigation." She turned to the officers standing by the exit. "Escort Deputy Riker into custody." formal charges to follow. The officers moved quickly, cuffs already in hand. "You can't do this," Riker shouted. But he was wrong. She already had. When court resumed, a young intern named Megan approached during a brief pause. "I saw what happened," she whispered, "with Deputy Riker this morning. I should have said something. I was scared." Eleanora didn't answer right away. She studied the young woman's trembling hands. Then she said gently, "Thank you for telling me. That matters." "I didn't stop it." "No," Eleanora replied, "but you're speaking now. That's more than most." The next witness was Howard Briggs, a black father whose teenage son had been injured by police during the protest. As he testified about being ignored when begging for paramedics, Eleanora didn't interrupt once. When he finished, she leaned forward. "Mr. Briggs, thank you for your courage. I know this isn't easy. I just want to know that it meant something, that someone is finally listening." "You've been heard," she said, not from the bench, but as someone who knew exactly what being silenced felt like. That night, Eleanora stood in her chambers, staring at her reflection. The mirror showed a woman with uneven patches where silver hair had once crowned her head. Decades ago in Vietnam, she'd worn her hair military short while facing discrimination both for her gender and her race. Later, when she'd finally grown it out in retirement, it had become a symbol of her freedom. Now it was gone again, not by choice, but by force. Yet something in her eyes had changed. The same determination that had carried her through combat zones now burned brighter than ever. When court reconvened the next morning, the atmosphere had shifted. Word had spread about what happened to the elderly black judge who had once been a decorated colonel. Reporters lined the gallery. Civil rights attorneys came from across the state. After calling the court to session, Eleanora addressed a defense attorney who had risen to speak. "Your Honor, before we proceed, we'd like to make a formal request. Due to recent developments." "You mean the arrest of Deputy Riker and the incident in the courthouse hallway?" "Yes, Your Honor. These events may present a conflict of interest, a question of judicial impartiality." Eleanora stood, walked slowly to the edge of the bench. "You're suggesting that because I was assaulted yesterday, I can't carry out the duties of my position? I'm suggesting perception of bias." "Let me stop you right there," she said, her voice carrying the weight of 70 years of overcoming obstacles. "I was publicly assaulted. Not for what I said, not for what I did, but for who I am. Because someone saw an elderly black woman walking into a courtroom and decided she couldn't possibly hold power." She paused, letting her words sink in. "And what did I do in response? I took my seat. I conducted this hearing. I followed every rule, every code of conduct." The attorney's jaw clenched as Eleanora continued. "You know what real bias looks like, counselor? Real bias is a man using clippers to shave off a woman's hair without cause. Real bias is 12 ignored complaints buried by this very institution." She leaned forward. "This court will proceed. I will not recuse myself." Later that day, a former courthouse employee named Denise Talley took the stand, revealing how complaints against Riker had been systematically buried for years, often with the approval of respected judges. On the final day of the hearing, rain poured outside the Charleston courthouse. Still, people came, reporters, protesters, clerks, witnesses, because everyone knew what was happening wasn't just justice. It was history. Eleanora walked into the courtroom in silence. She paused at the front of the bench, looked out at the packed gallery, and then did something unexpected. She took off her robe, folded it gently, and laid it across her chair. She stood there, no longer shielded by title, just a woman who had served her country for 30 years before becoming one of its judges. "I've sat behind this bench for years. I've worn the robe, carried the title, but I've also stayed silent longer than I should have, and today I'm done being quiet." She glanced at the defense table, then to the prosecution, then to the courtroom full of citizens. "This court finds Deputy Hank Riker guilty of abuse of power, violation of civil rights, and official misconduct. But it doesn't stop there." She stepped forward. "This court also recommends immediate review of every complaint ever filed under his name and formal investigation into any official who suppressed them." Then she reached for a folder beneath the desk. This is a policy proposal, effective immediately. I am instituting a mandate for all bailiffs, marshals, and courthouse personnel under this jurisdiction. Her voice never wavered. It's called the Washington Mandate. It requires comprehensive anti-bias training, psychological screening, regular evaluations, and a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior inside federal courthouses. She held it in the air. I will take this to the circuit, to the judiciary, to the Senate if I have to, because what happened to me should never happen to anyone. The officers opened the side door and Hank Riker walked in, still in cuffs, no longer in uniform. Eleanora faced him. Mr. Riker, this court sentences you to the maximum allowable penalties under federal law. Her voice dropped, calm but piercing. You spent your career deciding who was worthy of dignity and who wasn't. You thought the badge made you immune. That people like me, black, elderly, but with more courage and service in our little fingers than you've shown in your entire life, would never hold a gavel. She nodded to the officers. Take him away. Months later, Judge Eleanora Washington stood before a middle school classroom. Her hair had begun growing back, silver sprouts covering her scalp. A student asked, "Do you still believe in the system?" She paused. "I don't believe in what the system was, but I believe in what it can become." This story reminds us that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about standing tall when the world tells you to shrink. If this story moved you, if it made you feel seen or heard, please don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs hope, and comment below with your thoughts on respect and service. Because justice doesn't end in the courtroom. It begins with us together right now.